Hello, and welcome to How I Hire, the podcast that taps directly into the best executive hiring advice and insights. I'm your host, Roy Nodowitz, founder and president of Nodo Group Executive Search. Jaime Schmidt is an entrepreneur and founder of Schmidt's Naturals. She started the brand in her kitchen in Portland, Oregon in 2010, and she's known for disrupting and modernizing natural personal care products and bringing them into the mainstream market. Under Jaime's leadership, Schmidt's grew into a household name that now lines the shelves of retailers like Target, Costco, and Whole Foods. In 2017, Schmidt's partnered with CPG giant Unilever, with Jaime continuing on as the brand's founder and spokesperson. Today, Jaime focuses her efforts on helping emerging entrepreneurs pursue their dreams. And recently, she launched Supermaker, an editorial-driven platform that celebrates diverse, independent brands and creators and works to empower progressive values in the workplace. Jaime's also the co-founder of Color, an investment portfolio that supports diverse and underrepresented founders. She also co-owns a local entrepreneurial collective called Portland Made. Jaime has been recognized as one of Goldman Sachs' 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs, the Pacific Northwest Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young, and Woman of Influence and Executive of the Year by Portland Business Journal. We're fortunate to have Jaime Schmidt joining us to share her entrepreneurial, creative, and smart approach to building teams from the ground up. Jaime, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you being on our podcast.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
So I think it would be great to just start with a little bit of context. If you could tell us about your career journey and your entrepreneurial path, I think that'd be a good starting point.
Sure. Well, I'm most known for starting the business Schmidt's Naturals here in Portland in my kitchen in 2010. But before that, I was definitely on a journey. Gosh, I could go back to my childhood when I making cash at the lemonade stand.
Yeah, I mean, that's relevant, right?
Yeah. It was great. My parents always instilled the importance of work in my childhood. And so, back then it was annoying, but now I'm really grateful for it. So I've been working for a long time. And, once really choosing my career path became important in my early adulthood, that's when things got a little stressful. I didn't always know what I wanted to do. I hated that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then in college, I remember being at, the frat parties and people would ask, what's your major? And it was a question I hated because I didn't know. And I felt kind of stupid. I was like, why am I here in college when I don't know what I want to do? But I chose business. It was a path that I felt was smart enough where there was possibility there, right? So I got my degree. I got an undergrad from Michigan State in business with an emphasis on human resources. I chose the HR focus because I thought, well, there's humans involved. This is somewhat interesting. Yeah. There's no spreadsheets. We can deal with people here. Continued kind of pursuing my path and ended up moving to Portland. I guess it was about 12 years ago now. And as part of that move, I promised myself that once I was here, I would, find the work that I was meant to find for myself. And so I started in HR at Portland Public Schools because I needed money. And once I was there, I said, all right, you have 1 year. And then after that, if you haven't figured it out, you're quitting and you're just going to do your thing. I worked my year. Yeah. And then I decided to quit and I just started pursuing all sorts of side hobbies and hustles and trying to find my creative outlet. And being in Portland, I wanted to fit in, right? Because everybody here was creative, doing something cool, and I wanted to find my place. So I tried sewing, I took some interior design classes, I ended up doing all sorts of things, and nothing was really, I think the biggest thing was that the passion wasn't there. But then one night, I was very pregnant at the time. I was about 7.5, 8 months pregnant. Being pregnant too, I felt like the pressure was really there to figure this thing out, right? Because once you have the kid, your life changes. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to figure out, who Jaime Schmidt was. So I found this class on how to make shampoo. And I'd always been really intrigued by natural products. It was a priority of mine, especially being pregnant. I was paying close attention to the products I was using. So I went to this how to make shampoo class and I immediately loved it. It was unlike anything I experienced. I thought, this is my thing.
Such a Portland thing, too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it was in this lady's house. I remember it was a cold fall day. We were all standing over the stove and there's, herbs and essential oils wafting through the room. But I loved it so much that I went home and I thought, I want to do more of this. I don't know what that means, but I'm doing it. So I bought all these DIY books, started making things. I had lotions, sunscreens, shampoos.
That seems daunting. There's so many ingredients.
Yeah.
And where do you start?
Right. I had a few books that helped as a guide. Yeah. Back then I'm Googling a little bit, but books were more my thing. But the thing was, a deodorant was one thing I was really excited to make because I had been on this quest to find a natural deodorant that worked
Mm-hmm.
and nothing worked well. And so that is what became my priority, was like making a deodorant that smelled good, looked beautiful, and that worked.
Right.
And it was great because I had no pressure. It wasn't a business at the time. It was a hobby. It was something I enjoyed doing. And so it was low stress. But I jumped into it. And next thing you know, I'm at farmers markets around Portland selling, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So at what point did you realize that you needed to have somebody to help you?
Yeah. So I officially, claimed Schmidt's as a business about a year in. And I was doing it all myself. And there was one day, though, I just understood that it was taking up more than what like a full-time job should take. Being a new mom too. I was working out of my house. So that made it a little tricky.
Were you still making all the product yourself, or were you starting to outsource that?
Yeah, no, we made it up until like just a couple of years ago, really. But yeah, so I understood that I needed help mostly with shipping. That's where I was getting bogged down. I didn't love it. I wanted to be in the kitchen, touching the product. And so I had a friend that referred her friend to me for a shipping job. One day a week it started. Actually, I think it started like 4 hours a week or something. And then within like a week, he was there 3 days a week. And then within a month, he was there full time. So it quickly became a full-time job.
Wow. Was that because sales were ramping that quickly?
Yeah.
Or?
So back then, it was still the farmers market sales. I'd started to get some local retail accounts too. This was probably 2012.
So one person working
out
of your garage, right?
It was my garage. Yeah. So it wasn't beautiful. It was kind of an older garage. It smelled a little musty. And I remember he was using my son's old diaper changing table. So he's up there wrapping up the deodorant boxes.
Great boxing area.
Yeah. He loved it though, because he would turn on sports radio. Mm-hmm. He had the whole place to himself. He could work at his own pace. He was great. Yeah. But then shortly after that, about a week after, I hired somebody for production too. Right. That was the hardest for me to give up, is because I had my hands on the product for so long. And I really was convinced that nobody could make the deodorant as well as I could. So that person worked in the mother-in-law house, which is behind our house. So he had his own space. He was rocking out to his punk music and setting his own schedule. And it worked. Like what we had going worked really well.
That's amazing. Yeah. Did they come in for lunch or?
So one of my friends, his name was Alex. He was a friend of a friend. That was the one with production. My husband was good friends with him as well. And so he would join us for lunch sometimes, sit in the kitchen with us. Yeah.
So when did you outgrow your house and your ADU?
Well, it happened pretty fast. It worked out nicely though, because there was a space around the corner from us that was for rent. It was an interesting building. It was in a residential area. So the fact that there was even like a possible, production space was odd. But I saw this space, it was right around the corner, and it said for rent. And so I was curious, and I called the guy and told him what I was doing, told him I had a deodorant business and needed a little more room. And he was perfect for me because we were able to build out a lease that worked for us. It was month to month. There were very minimal upfront costs. And then we sort of developed the space together. We put up walls and shelves and did things at a very reasonable rate. I think he felt bad for me or understood, the importance of supporting this local business.
Yeah. What were some of the first positions or things that you started to need, like more than 3 people? So
my person who I hired for shipping, his name is Ben. It didn't take long before he started taking on other responsibilities too, like procurement, ordering raw materials, and even taking on some of the customer support. He was willing to do anything. It was great. And then Alex continued with the production and eventually became the lead in that area. But within, a few months of moving into that production space, we recognized we needed more people. So Ben started building out a little team there. We had a couple people come in and help with, mostly with shipping. We outgrew that space within about a year, even after expanding the space. So then we moved out towards the airport. We got a nice, legit production space out there. And that's when we really started building out the team.
What kind of people did you have to hire first?
Yeah, mostly manufacturing. So the top level sort of management roles were very lean. I didn't hire many people, partly because budget and also because I was sort of like to be in control of all of that. But a key hire really was my husband, who came on in 2014. Chris, he became our executive in marketing. So really led that whole department. And so it was great bringing him on, because then he was able to take on the digital marketing strategy, and that really boosted our online sales. And
did your recruiting and HR background, did that sort of help you early on throughout the process?
It did. I think some of the little annoying details of hiring, like, what to do with the I-9 forms and record keeping, that sort of thing, a lot of new business owners don't think about. And so I had that knowledge, at least.
Wasn't overwhelming or daunting.
Right. Yeah. And that stuff is really important, but that's one of those things that gets overlooked as a new business owner.
Thinking about not everyone has the opportunity to hire their partner who they know a lot about.
Yeah.
As, new entrepreneurs starting a company, when they're thinking about bringing people on board, a lot of times they bring friends or family, and that can be challenging, especially when it comes to ownership and things like that.
It can be. I hired my mother-in-law too.
Yeah.
Her name's Pam. She was great, but I can see where it could be problematic. For us, we didn't run into issues. There were times when I felt I could see the potential for challenges, but we were able to really make it work. But speaking of families, as I was building out the production team, we had a lot of people who would refer their family members. And so there was one point where we had about 10 people from literally the same family working together, which I started to get uneasy about because, one, what if there's something tragic that happens and, everybody takes off at the time off? Or what if there's one person who is upset and then it just causes this bigger problem? And so, but this team or this family worked really well together, and we were fortunate that we didn't have issues there. But it is something I would probably caution against as you get bigger.
So thinking about the early days, were there any recruiting challenges or things that you had that made it difficult to hire people being an emerging, smaller company?
There were times when I probably rushed into hires a little too quickly because I would wait so long until like the very last minute where we were, desperate for help, and then just maybe not take the right time to do the best diligence. Recruiting for a startup is interesting. I think there's some people who can do it and there's others who just can't work in that environment. And you think about like somebody taking a job at a fast growing company like Schmidt's, and it's a risk for them, right? They're really putting a lot of trust in you with this new company to help enable their success too. And so I think there's a lot of give and take on both ends.
Yeah. When it comes to that, was there a way that you were able to assess for that, whether somebody had the appetite or ability to work in that environment versus not?
Yeah, it's not easy. I don't think there's a magic recipe, but one thing that was really important to me or that I noticed was working well was when you're interviewing somebody and when they're in the door, it's who cares about those traditional questions when you're interviewing, right? Like, I feel like for us, what worked really well was just hearing somebody say what impact they could make on your business as it stands today. And I think even the resume, like I overlooked the education and some past experiences didn't matter. It was more like get in the door. Let's talk about like why you're passionate about working for Schmidt's and what can you do to show real value.
That's really interesting. One of the things that we had talked about earlier was the idea of, hiring people who maybe haven't done that exact job before, or maybe they just had great competencies and then you gave them responsibility to do things that maybe they didn't have necessarily the resume for.
Right. So, that's true. I think our most successful hires are the people who would grow within the organization. I mean, they would start in X role and then, a year or two later, they're working in a completely different capacity.
So how did you come to understand, someone's capabilities before they came in, but then also as they were developing?
Yeah. You don't always know. Sometimes it takes getting them in the door and then sort of learning where they excel. And sometimes that means shifting their position a little. I think if you see real passion and dedication and hard worker, you're willing to work with this person. So I think there's some flexibility required on the founder or the entrepreneur's part, in bringing in their staff and really growing together.
What didn't work? Like if somebody came in and they weren't able to adapt or, evolve as the company was, or, what were some of the things that you picked up on or were themes as it relates to what worked and didn't work?
Yeah, I saw the biggest struggle with people who had worked in, environments where they really thrived on structure. People coming maybe from a more corporate scene or coming from a business that had like all their policies and procedures laid out. And not just that, but more like the way they worked. Like in a startup, every day's so unpredictable, right? And you need to be able to like shift gears and understand that like it's not always going to go as you think it is. And you have to wear different hats and you have to, move around in different positions and work as a team. And I think that works for some people. Some people thrive in that. And then there's others that just can't handle it. And they see it as a failure on the part of the boss, right?
I think people fall into two categories. There's the people who, they thrive on that change and they're like, it's always different. Every day is a new challenge or a new fire. And they're like, I love it. And then other people are like, every day is different.
Right.
And it's really hard because I like to know what's going to happen.
Especially at I'd say the higher level, more management type roles. And then you get into manufacturing and that's a little more predictable generally. So with Schmidt's, we were really building out our manufacturing teams. We had 2 shifts going at one point. So we had the morning and the evening shifts. And so that meant a lot of employees that needed to be hired. And in those roles, it's generally a little more black and white or clear cut, but still there were things that would come up and you'd have to shift gears and, maybe like the shipment of raw materials didn't show up. And then you have a team of, 60 people standing
Waiting
there
around.
with nothing to make.
Yeah.
And so then what does that mean? It means, okay, let's shut down manufacturing or we're all going to clean today or whatever it might be.
Wow. What are the things that, you look for when you're evaluating candidates? Or is there, one thing we had talked about was like this passion. You had mentioned like, what can you do for the company? But what kinds of things did you try to see if they smelled good, like with they were wearing your product or?
That always helped if they, if they knew about Schmidt's and if they're wearing it, that's even better. Yeah, like that personal touch was really important. And I think specifically about some of the back of the house or manufacturing, shipping jobs, we saw so many resumes for these jobs. It was one after another and it was tiring to go through them. And so what really stood out to me was even if it was one very short sentence, just something to show like, hey, I'm taking the time to like really reach out to you on a personal level. And, I know a little bit about your company and here's why I want to work for you. And this sounds really old school, but a cover letter, like you wouldn't believe how many people just don't do it. And it doesn't even need to be like, really official, like formal thing, but just a few words or sentences about like who they are and what makes them interesting.
Right.
That's important.
I've gotten so many cover letters where they put the wrong company name.
Yeah,
It's like they forgot
the copy paste. Yeah. I know. I think back to when I was young and I was looking for a job and I was that person, right? Just like popping in the name. But I just think like times have changed and people have to be a little more strategic and innovative with how they apply to jobs.
So when you talk about somebody coming in and sharing with you how they might contribute, how do they have context for the organization in order to be able to even answer that question?
Yeah, I can think of one example specifically when we were making a hire in our creative department. We had a gentleman interview and he brought in this whole presentation of like this campaign for Schmidt's that was completely unlike anything we had done before. So he had like photos with models styled a certain way and the messaging and the like key takeaway sort of points for this campaign. And it was really compelling. And it was a way that we hadn't looked at marketing before. And we ended up hiring him and then we implemented the campaign for, I think it was Valentine's Day.
Wow. So he had done some thought like in
very
advance.
Specific, presentation of
and you felt it was relevant and you ended up actually implementing it. So
it was cool because we just weren't, we can't think of everything, right?
Yeah.
As smart as we all are,
right.
Those are the hires that were so great were the people that would come to an interview with an idea that you're like, that's genius. Like, why didn't I think of that? It's like, I need this person on my team.
So your philosophy was basically just to hire smart people who didn't necessarily look at a job description and say, this is my job, but they might actually have a broader, like, I just want to help the company succeed kind of mindset.
Yeah, totally. And getting us thinking about things in ways that we hadn't before.
Right. That's fascinating. Was there any notable people or hires that that you can remember or recall without naming names?
We had one we took a risk on. He had an interesting energy about him, which was there was a lot of energy there, which we thought was good, and we could see the potential value he would bring. Once he was in the door, there were a few issues. Like he just wanted to do his own thing. So, for example, one day my husband walked out and said, "Hey, dude, you're watching cartoons on YouTube, like." What? And he looks at him and he said, he's like, yeah, is that cool? I mean, maybe. So just really odd, behaviors there. So that didn't last too long. But no, I mean, I think, overall we made some pretty smart hires and the majority of the team is still there with Schmidt's, especially our, creative team and our brand team, like the real heartbeat of the company is still strong.
How did you assess for culture fit? How did the culture evolve?
I think in the earlier days, it was easier. Having a smaller team, we had a certain kind of vibe in the office, and it was generally pretty easy to tell if somebody would fit in. But then as you get bigger and you need different skill sets and just a bigger team, I think that becomes a little more challenging. And so then you have to sort of reassess, what does culture mean to me and what sort of environment am I trying to build here? The one thing that became challenging as we got bigger is that I didn't know everybody. Where in the early days, like I could walk back, I knew everybody's name and I could chat with people on the spot. But as we got bigger, there were times when I would walk into the break room, for example, and people were like, who are you? And so then they'd be surprised to see like, oh, this is the person behind the business. Okay. It's harder as you get bigger. And that took a little bit of adjusting for me.
Yeah. So how do you think people would describe your values of the company?
Yeah.
And then was that formalized or was that, you're purpose driven, right? So.
Yeah, for sure. As we got further along in the business, it became really important to us to articulate those values, not just to the internal teams, but to our customers too. And I think it's an evolving thing in the beginning. And then, where Schmidt's really saw our purpose was in changing an industry and really leading the way for like this movement towards natural products. Before Schmidt's, there really weren't many brands, taking the lead on that. And so we really took pride in being that force in the industry.
Speaking of that, sort of the connection to mission and purpose, was that something that you assessed for or looked for in candidates, and how did you do that?
Yeah, it depends on the position you're hiring for, I think. It's not as critical maybe on the production line, but in some of these positions, like in marketing or product development, like that's key. They have to understand our position in the market and really get behind it.
So were there any defining moments where you had to sort of formalize the hiring process, approach, or philosophy?
Later in the business, that became a little more important as our team got bigger. I brought on an HR manager in, early 2017, maybe late 2016. That was because the hiring piece had become so substantial. It was taking up a lot of my time. And so I wanted somebody who could really focus on it and do it in a way that felt more structured.
Thinking and reflecting on that, what was more structured or what was different after you brought that person on board?
Some of it was post-hire, right? Like having the job description written up in a way that, was complete. Also just having a plan for performance reviews and pay increases and things that was just felt like a little more security for our employees and a little more organized.
Did you have like a leadership team ultimately? Like at what point did you have maybe 3 to 5 or 8 people around you?
I functioned always as a CEO throughout the growth of the business. My husband was our head of marketing communications, so he handled all that. My husband built out several teams in marketing. So we had our brand team, we had our product development team, actually that was separate. I headed that up, but under marketing was brand. We had digital marketing, and then we also had creative. So we had a lot of groups. As you can see, the management was lean, super lean. I mentioned Ben before, who had grown from shipping into running the whole manufacturing, and he actually became like the head of the whole sort of warehouse scene. So he was overseeing shipping and production. And then we brought on an operations manager in 2017, and she really took the lead on everything back in the house.
Do you feel like you were able to scale so quickly because you kept things really focused, and that way you didn't have like a lot of different people working on different products or different strategies?
I think that helped, not getting bogged down, being flexible and able to shift gears really quickly for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so Jaime, you had mentioned at one point you had tapped out every staffing firm in Portland. So can you tell us that story?
Yeah, it's true. We were experiencing major growth. We had POs coming in from Target and Walmart, like hitting us at the same time. So we were trying to ramp up for that and get all the inventory made. And that meant, bringing on an extra shift, and it had to happen quickly. And we had relationships with multiple staffing companies in the area. And we literally were at a point where we had maxed out every single one.
And they're like, oh, it's Jaime.
Yeah, it's Jaime again, which was cool. But I recognized there was a need for me. I don't know if it means more staffing companies in Portland or better planning maybe on our end, but that was fun. We held a job fair too. That was to recruit some people. We had some success with that. We had some really great hires through the job fair.
So speaking about executive level hiring, so was there ever a time when you had to use an executive search firm like Noto Group?
Yeah, we did. I didn't know about you then. I used someone from out of town, but it was really like whoever emailed me and said, hey, I'm a staffing company. Yes, we need you. Thank you. My first product development hire was through a staffing company as well, an executive search firm. And she had been working for a big CPG firm in Ohio. The search firm called her and said Schmidt's was interested in hiring her and pulled her out of the job. And then she moved cross country to work for us.
Yeah, that's like every day here.
That's cool. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I'm like, we stole her.
No, it's definitely a different approach than waiting for people to apply to a job.
I think that was one of our very first hires from a real corporate scene. But at that point in our growth, it was great because she brought some knowledge and insights that we didn't have. She had been working for a company that had been around for ages. It was huge and could help us put some systems in place.
Do you remember anything from that experience working with the search firm about the process or approach that, was valuable?
Yeah, I think just knowing that they were taking care of it and I had minimal involvement because I was too busy. I would tell them my kind of key targets for what companies to go searching within. And so then they knew, okay, Jaime wants somebody from XYZ industry or this business. And so then they would, I remember them telling me a story about one of the guys they were trying to recruit. They called him while he was at work and he literally went into the closet at work to have the private conversation.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You're probably very used to that.
Cars,
That's
or, hey, can you hold on a second?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Yeah. So aside from those initial hires, now that Unilever is involved, are you involved in hiring at this point? Or
Not in hiring. No,
Yeah.
my role now is around supporting our global expansion. That's been really exciting, and the teams are continuing to grow to support that too.
When you were looking for partners for acquisition or growth capital, was there a process that you went through in terms of evaluating those partners as a match for your company?
Yeah, we did. We had a broker who was helping with that process, but Unilever was a clear winner for us. We had been talking to other strategics, some really big names, and we had gotten along in the process. And once we really saw what Unilever stood for, and especially the minute they came to Portland and we were all sitting in a room together, it was clear, like, this is the partner for us. Our values are aligned. They didn't want to shake up, what we had already created at Schmidt's. They understood, the real value in what I had made with my business and didn't want to change that. And so they wanted to keep the key teams intact. They really understood that they couldn't do it better. That's what made Schmidt so successful, was that energy that we had, independent of them as we were growing. And yeah, it's been great. We've been really happy with the partnership.
I feel like the big CPG companies are getting a little bit wiser around that. And
for sure.
They had, obviously with Ben & Jerry's, proven that they've been able to sort of let a brand do what they do.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And that, they just can never replicate it.
Right.
It's just not, in their DNA.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of the projects that you're working on currently and what types of things that you're excited about.
Yeah, so I am, excited to still be supporting Schmidt's. I have some international travel coming up early next year as we continue to grow into new markets. But since the acquisition, I've started a couple other projects. One is an investment company that I started alongside my husband, Chris. That's called Color. And we invest in underrepresented entrepreneurs, primarily women and people of color. We're real passionate about consumer packaged goods because that's where our experience is. That's what we were able to do with Schmidt's, is really, take a company from the kitchen to an acquisition. And so we've learned a lot, and there's a lot of value that we can add to these companies.
Are you finding that there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who need assistance and resources?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to point out too, though, that I think getting funding has become a trend, and it's something that I am sensitive to. And when I have conversations with founders, I sometimes will say, like, hey, are you sure you need this money right now? Because I basically bootstrapped my business and, grew it with nothing. And so I want people to consider that as a possibility before, giving up a bunch of equity or taking on a big loan. I think that's
Or
key.
hiring people that they don't need.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have the investment.
Yeah, I do. That's called Color. I also have a media platform called Supermaker. That one was also started with my partner, Chris. The goal behind that was really to bring exposure to brands and founders and have their stories told in a way that hasn't been done before. So we're sort of challenging traditional business media. We're really excited about the opportunities there. We're also having really great conversations around like workplace issues, topics of relevance that are maybe socially or politically heated. So I think we're making big waves here in what we're doing. And
That's interesting. It sort of goes together a little bit. All
everything we do is aligned,
Yeah.
right? Like this greater purpose of supporting entrepreneurs. That is what I'm passionate about. That's where I really see my value now. And it's fun. And I feel like we're only just getting started.
This has been really fantastic.
Good.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And hopefully we can check in again
Absolutely.
at a future date and learn more about some of the things that you're working on now that will certainly obviously be successful in the future. So
yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to How I Hire. Visit howihire.com for more details on our show and sign up for our newsletter to get updates on the podcast as well as featured executive career opportunities. If you know somebody who would enjoy this episode, let them know about our podcast. You can also leave us a review wherever you listen. How I Hire is created by Noto Group, an executive search and leadership consulting firm for brands that support healthy, active, and sustainable lifestyles. To learn more about Noto Group, visit notogroup.com or follow us on LinkedIn. This podcast was produced by Anna McLean.